Hey gang, Professor McElroy here. Let me make sure I got everything turned on here. We're back in recording mode. I just want to hide my floating menu here so I get full screen. Okay, we're into week 3, learning module 3. Great job so far. Week 1, we really were just exploring the anatomy of type, what the shape's anatomy was, what you called things, the history of type, where we started, Gutenberg Press, all the way up to Futura typeface, right? We kind of covered the gambit of, where we came from as typesetters, typographers, and kind of where we are now and kind of where we're going forward. Talked a little about different history of different typefaces, why you would use certain ones for certain applications. So week 1 was all about just giving you foundational kind of historical and terminology for using type, experimenting with type, communicating to others with why you chose certain things related to type. Week 2, we got into like type as a shape, right? Yeah, letters, numbers, and symbols have sounds, right? We write them out, they make words, those words mean something. But week 2 was all about just getting you to see the positive and negative space of the letter form and what it means as a shape. Had nothing to do with really legibility or readability, right? We did type animals. We started exploring type as a shape. The reason why this process is so important, you need to know the history of the fonts, history of typography, history of typeface, history of typeset. You need to look at that typeset in its shape, right? It's positive and negative space so that you can explore that space when you're doing it for visual communication purposes. It's easy to pick a picture. It's more difficult to pick a font, right? So we went from history of to the shape of, and now week 3 is all about the application of. Okay, we know the history of type. We know the anatomy of the letter form. We know what it looks like, the positive and negative space. We know how to use scale and proportion and overlap to create kind of an emphasis of foreground, middle ground, and background. Like we got this thing going. Week 3 is all about, okay, now we have to write something, right? We got to use fonts. We got to use typography. We got to use words and sentences. We need to like be able to use the letter form and communicate whatever message we're trying to communicate effectively to our potential consumer or customer. So now we're going to the actual application of the letter form. So we have a couple of mini projects this week. First being just a basic, simple little poster. And the poster is just going to be the name of our class, my name, and the session, which is winter 2023. And we're just going to use typography now to say, okay, what of that information is the most important? What should be really big? What should be really small? How can I explore this portrait or landscape format, standard old 16:9 format, in an interesting way in order to attract someone to stop and read what I'm trying to say? So legibility and readability is important. Visual hierarchy is important. Choosing the appropriate scale, proportion, overlaps is important, but it's still in one of the most traditional, simple projects that you can do, which is a poster, right? It's the most simple communicating visual communication project you can have. I absolutely love it. It's one-sided. You got to get the message across, right? Someone's going to be walking by, they turn their head, they have to be able to read it, right? It's a quick eye catcher, a quick way to advertise or promote something. I noticed in our hallway tonight, we're doing a blood drive. The blood drive's got like a person's picture on it, and it's got type all over the place, and it's all really small. I don't know how many people are going to stop and read that and say, hey, I'm going to come back on this day and give blood, right? If it was me, I would do a big blood drop with the date, the time, and to catch your eye, right? Not so photo-based, kind of looks like everything else kind of thing. But I think that's what the Blood Mobile does. I mean, they're standard posters. They just put a date and time on. So I think they need a typographer to do a little better job in their communication of their event poster. So our first little mini project is the event poster, which is just an advertising poster for designing with type. Our second one is exploring the title Little Red Riding Hood in some kind of logo kind of way. And so in my announcement here, I posted a bunch of them. There's so many different ways to explore the concept of Little Red Riding Hood. I think everyone knows the story of the Brothers Grimm and Little Red Riding Hood, but it could be like, more mean and evil, or really like sweet and, preschool pop-up book kind of thing. But it's choosing fonts, choosing scale, choosing the words that are most important, and kind of playing around that. So we have our little little event poster. We have our logo project where we can do a little bit of perspective, or we can put a drop shadow or glow. We can start to do little effects with our typography and a simple logo treatment. So mini project 1, mini project 2, and then the last mini project for this week is what's called Fontstruct, which is a website that allows you to design your own typeface. Now, out of the 3 projects this week, that one is the time eater, because you're making your own letters in a cloud-based website environment, and you're creating all of the upper and lowercase letters. So it takes a little bit of time, but do know that it is web-based, which means it's a website. So it's a set up a username and profile, and it saves your process no matter what part of the process you're in. So you can literally do it on your phone, on a computer. I don't want to say at a red light because I don't want you doing that, but you can literally be designing your typeface at anywhere, anytime. It's cloud-based, not tied to a software application. If you have an internet connection and you have a device that you can tap into it, you can do it. But just keep in mind, the event poster might be 45 minutes or an hour out of your time. The little Red Riding Hood logo would be another maybe hour out of your time. But the font construction could be 4 or 5 hours putting together your upper and lower case letters. So just kind of from a time management standpoint, kind of keep that kind of in account as you tackle each of your 3 mini projects this week. And remember, legibility and readability is important. So we need to make sure that our solutions for this week, I can read, I can process, and I can understand. So be very careful with the Pathfinder tool, cutting letters out of other letters, making it too busy or cluttered when you're creating something, too much busy overlap, because legibility and readability is a thing now. When we were doing it just as an image for fun, as an abstract expression, kind of, sort of, legibility and readability wasn't really that important. But now we're into using type to communicate, right? We're visual communicators. So just keep that in mind when you're doing your type poster. I need to be able to read everything that you write. When you're doing your logo, I need to be able to read Little Red Riding Hood somewhere in that logo. So don't get so crazy, so experimental, so abstract with some of your elements that you use legibility. A lot of students will use the R from red and riding and hood and make it one R for both words, but they'll use some abstract illustration or script for the R, and it makes the reading of the logo very difficult. So just keep that in mind. In the end, as graphic designers, digital designers, visual communicators, whatever you want to call what we do, legibility and readability does matter if the written word is an element in the communication. So we're doing a lot of letters as shapes so that you understand positive and negative space and kind of how to explore space with the written word. But do keep in mind that legibility and readability for a final product in many cases is important. You'll go to, I don't know, ABC Liquor or one of those, you go to all the labels on all of the liquor bottles, and some of them have such a black letter style to them that you can't read them. They are so ornate. That bothers me, because how do you tell someone something you like if you can't even read the label to find out what the product was that you bought that you liked? So just kind of keep that in mind. I'm experimental with my typeface, but legibility and readability still is really important. Okay, so let's take a look, and we're going to open up Illustrator, and we're going to do some maybe 25 minutes per mini project, kind of exploring the space, talking about layout, trying to figure out what we want to do that will begin the process for your mini projects, a little mini exploration of them. So the first thing is our type poster. And I went in and I grabbed a bunch of like type only poster solutions so you can see how you can really explore space with scale, proportion, and direction. And look at this one. It's written on a 45 this way. Everything's written on a 45 this way, which creates that really nice 90-degree angle. They're using, in essence, a 2-color palette, blue and white on a black background. And the blue is controlling the hierarchy of what they're trying to communicate. And uppercase versus upper and lowercase versus lowercase is controlling space, foreground, middle ground, and background. So I wanted to include, even though these have way more information than I'm asking you to do, that the designers are really thoughtfully controlling leading and kerning and spacing, little picture frames to create paragraphs, like a really good job at understanding typography, understanding spacing, and understanding things like using angles to create kind of energy and personality. So that's the first one. Here's the second one. This one really simple, but they made a 90-degree, in essence, a box corner by using distort or perspective in the typography. So they wrote it, this is like an invisible cube, right? So they wrote it on the front face and made everything in this paragraph kind of leaning towards the right. And then they took the support information and did right align versus left align, and they did a lean to the left, creating, in essence, kind of a negative space cube or 3D box out of the typography. Again, not using images, using typography as the primary element, but still creating a very interesting solution. So think back to our poster project where I was like, you have to use every uppercase, every lowercase, you can do whatever you want. There really isn't a wrong answer. And everyone tried to create something interesting in space with only letters, numbers, and symbols. Well, you're trying to do the same thing with the type poster project. The only difference is legibility and readability matters. So you can't get too experimentally crazy with overlaps and black and white and the Pathfinder tool, because you have to be able to read it. But you'll notice in both of these, blue, white on a black background is a very interesting way to create what is important in your design and what is secondary in your design. So just know color can be a really important aspect of typography when you're trying to create something of interest for the communicator, the consumer that you're trying to promote to, market to, advertise to catch their eye and get them to read, right? And so, gosh, you can do type as a solution in your internet search, and you will get just so many interesting things. Right alignment, scale. This is smaller than this. This is the biggest size. This is the smallest size, right? So this is like an H1 or header 1. This is like an H3 or header 3. And this is like an H7 or header 7 size. So there's 3 different sizes of type in the solution in order to create foreground, middle ground, and background. So you're just seeing there's so many ways using typography that you can create a really interesting solution by just dictating a size, dictating a space in your design, and using layout, using a grid in order to kind of control and communicate. Imagine if this was rotated on a 45, it would be even more dynamic and interesting. If you took this thing and just rotated it on a 45 and made kind of this invisible 45-degree triangle in the corner. I like to rotate things because it creates energy. The minute you take something off its baseline, take something off its 0, 0 coordinate, and you rotate it 10%, 15 degrees, 30 degrees, 45 degrees, even 90 degrees, immediately you create a visual interest because you're taking it off the newspaper style, reading left and right, top to bottom, kind of traditional reading format. You will notice on this solution that the kerning is really tight on this. So if you did not use a fat face or a bold or a heavy weighted typeface, this would be really hard to read. But because it is such a sans serif, heavy or fat face typeface, you can make this kerning a negative number, which is what this is. This is like a -10, -20 in your kerning in order to get it this tight. But because it's big, it's all cap, and it's a heavy typeface, it's still legible and readable. Gosh, even the leading is really tight on this. I mean, this negative space is really tight from baseline to cap height, but it works because they chose the appropriate typeface for it. So just some really interesting solutions. And here's the last one I put in our announcement section, just to show you how you can use basic shapes to call out information and create, in essence, visual paragraphs. So, right, you have this little kind of silhouette that's kind of like a house shape. That's holding the main copy. You've got this little ribbon shape, which is basically like a rectangular bar, creating kind of the intro. Then you have a separate inverted house shape to get your support copy. So you're seeing that they're just creating shapes in order to encapsulate the typography, in order to dictate foreground, middle ground, and background, and control your eye. And you will see in the description for the event poster, the first mini project this week, you're allowed to use color and shapes. So you're immediately seeing shapes and how you can really control how someone, this is all white type, but look at the difference. Look at the bold on this red color, how it stands out compared to the white on this kind of muddy color, right? Totally different. The red stands forward, right? That calls forward. That feels like the most important thing coming forward. I guess John Fogerty's a big deal, so maybe it is the most important block of information. I'm not a John Fogerty fan, but I think this is a really quality solution. Look at the use of typography, script and script here. So it's using the same rules of thumb with using a set number of typefaces, 2, using vertical space, using shapes, using simple line strokes to communicate an area of information, and using stacking. See, this is justified in order to create mini paragraphs. So the thing I like to tell all students, the internet is your friend. Typography is inspiring. Finding things that you are attracted to, things that look a certain way, things that have certain kerning and leading and color palettes and kind of how things are laid out. And it could be in the United States or it could be around the world. I spend a lot of time studying design from other countries just because I want to see what their font selection looks like, how their language communicates with scale and proportion, and how they use shape, color, and texture in order to communicate effectively. So design is a global thing. So don't be afraid to be inspired. Look at this. They used a period to separate day, month, and year. Totally different. It even looks awkward to us, right? The 29th month, that doesn't make any sense, right? It's out of order. But when you think about it for a minute, oh, day, month, year, that makes more sense. So maybe I want to use a period to separate my date. Maybe I want to use a vertical line or a horizontal line to kind of create space for something. So inspiration is all around us. I spend more time looking around at packaging design and advertisements and billboards and t-shirts designs, and if I'm on the web, website designs, just feeding my brain with inspiration. Because look at this little footer. They even rotated the logo and the information below the logo on its side 90 degrees vertically. Like they could have stacked that normally like this, but they chose to rotate it. But look at the energy that line creates. It points your eye up to the information that's at the top of the page. So exploration, experimentation, doing things a little out of the norm can be good as long as we understand the anatomy of typography and why it may be a good idea or may not be a good idea. And that's why we spend so much time talking about it week 1, so that we know the evolution of the written word so we can do it effectively. So let's go into our first mini project, and then we'll bounce into Little Red Riding Hood. I'll show you some samples. We'll talk a little bit. I'm not going to build all of the mini projects tonight. We're going to play a little bit in Illustrator to start each of the mini projects, just so that we can get the ball rolling. I can talk you through the creative problem solving and start connecting why we did what we did the first 2 weeks and why that may be important when we start producing portfolio projects that are type based. And that's what these are. We want them to be portfolio projects. We want you to be proud of them. My very first job, I think the most interesting thing in my portfolio was a total type solution. It was a mailer that opened up as a poster, and the company I went to interview for looked through my portfolio and they stopped 3 times on that thing, and it didn't have my photography, didn't have 3-dimensional drawings, had nothing that I did that I was super proud of. They went to typography and like, wow, this is really interesting, and all it is words in black and white. It was black and white. That was it. Nothing special. You could have printed it at your home, $45 DeskJet printer, folded it up, showed it to someone, and they were like, wow, this is really interesting. And it actually had nothing to do with the job I was interviewing for, but the marketing manager was really intrigued by how I used and explored type. So know that these mini projects, as we start producing them, they're important for your portfolio. I think over the years, I've posted type animals out on like LinkedIn and social media and stuff. When students create something, those are the #1 hits. Like the most reads, hits, click rate, whatever you want to call it, when I post student work, is always the type animal project. Because people are like, oh my God, like I didn't even think about that. Or one student created a still life of fruit and vegetables out of type, and someone saw it and they messaged me and they wanted it printed to hang in their kitchen because they thought it was an interesting still life of fruit. So it had a kitchen theme, but it was completely letters, numbers, and symbols. So students were like, absolutely. So I got a PDF of it. I sent it off to the person, and I guess they printed it and put it in their frame and hung it in their kitchen. Like, it was really interesting, but the power of typography is huge and the exploration of it is fun. But I have to tell you, from a portfolio standpoint, no matter what career, job, area of design you might eventually be interested in, the written word and how you explore typography is always a topic that is very intriguing to people. So just kind of keep that in mind as we're doing our mini projects. Okay, so let's go down here to week 3. Oh, a quick highlight on week 2, the Ransom Note. Great job on the type animal. Good job on the book jacket so far. Book jacket's pretty straightforward, right? You got the cover, the back, you got the interior flap. There isn't a whole lot to that. The Ransom Note is interesting. The Ransom Note's interesting because it's exploring kerning and leading. I have to be able to read the words, the sentences, and the paragraph that you're trying to say. But if you Google found letters as your internet search, you're going to get photographs of bicycle wheels that look like zeros. You're going to get a bench, a wooden bench, taken from a perspective that it looks like a Y or an H. The idea behind the Ransom Note is just like you would think it to be. Someone writing a note that someone could not track the author of, the handwriting of, when you do the project. So try to push the envelope a little bit with finding found letters for some of your words. So even if it's, this is a ransom note, try to make ransom note out of images of found letters. Try to make it be an exploration of letters in space. And I do it all the time with my phone. I take walks around campus and stuff, and I might stumble upon somebody, etching into something, a tree they carve letters in, and I might take a photo of something that looks interesting. The other night I was walking in my neighborhood and I noticed the manhole cover in the road was stamped with the city name, and the type they used to do it was really kind of interesting. So I'll take a picture and post it out on social media or something. I'll be like, look at this, it's really interesting or weird. I like found letters. Like, I actually created an app called Triptycha, and the concept is based on found object and creating the sum of the parts are greater than the whole, right? So all the parts make up the whole. So you can take little snapshots of life and compose those things together, and you can create a solution out of all these mini things. So it's a really interesting thing for me. So think about that when you're doing your Ransom Note, that found letters are very interesting for trying to create kind of a sentence or a structure out of things that aren't necessarily letters, but kind of like cut magazine, cut paper kind of stuff. And yes, there are fonts that are called ransom fonts, and you type them out there and it just writes everything in weird shapes and stuff. And that's fine. Just remember kerning and leading and spacing. You want this thing to look like a ransom note. So if you don't know what a ransom note looks like, Google it. I mean, there's ransom notes all over the internet for different things, from TV shows to all kinds of stuff. Okay, event poster. All right, so here we are. So, and typography, posters, it's a pretty standard thing. And no matter what job or project you're ever in, there's going to be a time you have to create a poster. But our job is to create a poster for the Designing with Type class. So imagine this is a lecture series, which it kind of is. It's once a week for 4 weeks. And we're trying to create some kind of 11 by 17 poster with the title of the class, the location and time of the class, my name, and your name. This is the only information we need on the poster. And it doesn't even have to say location or lecturer. They're going to know if it says Professor McElroy, I'm probably the guy giving the lecture. They're going to know Hodges University winter session 2023 is probably the location and the semester. So these titles or categories you don't have to list, but the type you do have to list, right? So we're doing 16 by 9. So you can do portrait and landscape. You can do 11 by 17, or even you could do 8.5 by 11. They're the same proportion. One's just a little bigger than the other. It depends on your space, reference what you're using and portrait and landscape, but you can create this thing however you want. But remember, you're being graded and judged on legibility and readability and creativity of space, right? We're trying to create a visual hierarchy. This should not be a memo. This should not look like you wrote it on a sticky note and stuck it on somebody's door, right? Typed it out in Word as a sentence. This is not an inter-office communication, right? You have a blank slate, no pun intended, right? So you want to vary type size. You want to maybe use color. You can use shapes, right? You can do squares and rectangles and stars. I mean, you can create things of interest, no photographs, no pictures. This should be purely typography, colors, shapes, and lines, no direct imagery. Now I say that, but you might want to, I don't know, create what looks like the Hodges building out of letters, numbers, and symbols. Kind of like, if you ever wanted to do like the Capitol building and do the pillars or something, or the Lincoln Memorial or something like that, you could use letters, numbers, and symbols to illustrate that, but no photos. So don't take a picture of me at the podium. Don't Google my name. I don't want me, although it might be interesting if I let you do that, because I would really know how much you like me based on the picture you use for me. But so our solution for the week. So this is mini project 1. So I'm going to open it up real quick. We're going to copy over the information so you can just see how I start to problem solve, and it may help you a little bit with your problem solving. We're going to talk a little bit about foreground, middle ground, and background. I'll go till like 7:20 or so 20 minutes or so exploring this, and then I'll save it and open it up as something for you to complete, because I do want to spend a little time talking about logo design, which is the Little Red Riding Hood project, which is project number 2. And I want to spend a little time with Fontstruct so I can build my first couple of uppercase letters with you, so you kind of see how the brick works and kind of how the software, the cloud-based app tool works to creating your font, so it opens up your eyes to the possibilities. So let's start with Illustrator. So I'm gonna open up Illustrator. I'm just gonna do 11 by 17. I think I'm gonna do landscape, because I kind of like when you turn things more widescreen than when you do it vertically. But vertical works really well with posters, because people tack them to telephone poles and they put them in windows. Like the actual application of a poster works better in portrait than landscape, because you typically have more vertical space than you do horizontal space, right? Even if you put it in a window, you don't want it on a landscape because it's going to block half the window, and then people can't actually see in the window in order to, look into the store or whatever. So let's go to tabloid. I'm going to go to landscape, because I'm going to turn it on its side. I don't have to worry about bleeds or any of that stuff, because we're just kind of working in our space, in our 11 by 17 horizontal space. And we'll talk about shapes and things like that. So let's go in and do create. And it's going to generate my 11 by 17. And then it's a blank canvas, right? And this is Illustrator's a pretty simple program for all intents and purposes. We're using the type tool. We can use shapes. We can use the pen tool and draw lines if we want. We can introduce color from our color palette. I mean, we have this space in horizontal form, which means I have more width than height. And designing is the longest word in designing with type. And I would guess designing with type would be the most important or the biggest thing in my design, because it's the name of the class, right? I was at the College Art Association's annual conference last week, and I was looking for typography stuff. Like I always look for curriculum and just things that are going on. And type was the biggest word in black and white on every cover of every book, of every periodical or magazine that had anything to do with typography. Type was always the biggest word. It was a black cover with white letters. So ooh, type thing, let me go look at it, right? So in our project description, I'm just going to go in here. I'm just going to highlight this and copy it, right? Because this is what I need to do. And so this is just like when you had to do the poster and you were just doing uppercase, lowercase, or whatever. And I was like, you have to use every letter, number, and symbol, right? So the thing I immediately did, and I'm just going to hit enter a bunch of times so it can be really big so you can see it. So I always use my pasteboard to organize my elements, right? This is how I always start. And I do work left to right. And I do tend to move my copy stuff over here to the right-hand side of the pasteboard, just because that's how my brain works. And so I work left to right, top to bottom in that kind of reverse format. Like I tell every student when we're in graphic design 1, you want to communicate in a reverse S. Upper left-hand corner is where we start as English readers. Bottom right-hand corner is where we end. And the focal point is somewhere in the middle here. So these are my elements. And so I immediately know this is foreground, this is middle ground, and this is background, scale-wise, right? The name of the class is the most important. Where it is, when it is, a second. So if you catch the consumer's eye with the name of the product, the next thing you need to catch them with is where to buy it or whatever. And last is who made it, right? When you're like doing I'm loving it and there's a big picture of a Big Mac, think about I'm loving it is the thing that attracts you to look. The Big Mac is the thing that makes you hungry. And the little logo of the M for McDonald's is the last thing. Once you're hooked to the campaign and you're attracted by that middle ground, that focal point, that food item or whatever it is, the last thing you think of is where do I get it, right? Where's the location, you know, who makes it, that sort of thing. So this is no different in this process. You always want to think foreground, which should be the biggest or in front of me. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to be the biggest, right? Because you could use a black shape and put white type on it and the scale of the letters aren't bigger, but the white type on the black background makes it more important because your eye attracts to that first. We call that a knockout or negative space in a design. So sometimes in packaging design, you'll see something like a shape rotated on a 45 to make like a ribbon in the packaging. And then inside that ribbon, they'll write words in white. Your eye immediately goes to that, right? That's the first thing your eye sees. Like if it's like 100% organic, you actually see that before you see the name orange juice. You immediately look at 100% organic. That's what they want you to do, because if they hook you to that, that's what makes this product unique. You'll read the rest of the information. So just know that scale doesn't always dictate foreground. Sometimes things are a little bit smaller, maybe the same size as other things, can still be foreground because they're put in a negative space or put white in a dark background, something to attract you. They use scale, they use shape, they use color, something to bring your eye. We could write all these words the exact same size in a run-on sentence. And if we made designing with type bold and everything else regular, you're going to read designing with type first, right? Because it's bold. And I'll actually show you right here how we could do that. And you're like, oh my gosh, like what a weird, interesting solution. So let's do that. So I'm just going to go right here and I'm going to write Hodges University, period, space, winter session 2023, period, space, all caps, designing with type, period, enter, lowercase, Professor McElroy, period, space, designer, chip. I'm just going to do Mac so it doesn't look like Professor McElroy is the designer also, right? So this is like just one big run-on sentence. So let's go into my paragraph. Let's center a line. And I'm just going to show you that even making something the exact same size, I'm going to make this super heavy, which is bold. I'm going to put a black shape behind it. I'm going to make these letters white. I'm going to make my designer name condensed italic. So you can immediately say, even in this simple little solution, I'm reading that first. I'm reading everything in regular type second, and I'm reading this, which is italic and dainty last. So I've created foreground, I've created middle ground, and I've created background just by changing the font family, changing the case sensitivity of the type, and changing the color of the type using a shape. Now, let's take that a little bit further. So let's take this. I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to make it all black again. I'm going to use my, instead of periods, I'm going to use enters, just so that you can see the difference. So I'm going to align this right. I'm going to move it over to the right-hand side. I'm going to make a copy of this. Move that over there. And I'm just using space. So I'm just talking you through the process here. So now you see bold, you see reading left to right, which means you read this before this. You move this over to right align. So now I'm playing with spacing, right? So this goes over, this feels like it's trying to be squeezed into this line. So this is bold, it's all uppercase, it's black, right? So you're reading it first because it's left. This is right aligned, so you read it like a paragraph, left to right, top to bottom, and the last thing is dainty and small in the bottom line. So I created foreground, middle ground, and background. Again, all the same size letters using case sensitivity, typeface, and spacing in order to dictate how I want people to communicate. This is effective. This is effective. And look at the use of negative space. This thing kind of looks lost because it's so much smaller and there's so much negative space, but your eye is immediately going to go to this. If I would have aligned this correctly, that does not read the same way. That reads like a paragraph. The minute I offset that and moved it, your eye immediately goes to this first. Watch what happens if I do this. Right? Now your eye's like, oh my gosh, why isn't this straight? And why isn't it over here in the paragraph? Right? I'm using angles to create energy. And look what happens if I do this. Right? Totally different solution. Still exploring foreground, middle ground, and background. So now what happens if I break this into different things? Now, look at the visual hierarchy of this. You obviously read this first. What do you read second? This or this? You read professor because it's more closely aligned with a standard baseline. This reads left to right, and you want to rotate it down a little bit, and it shares the same angle as this. Well, that wouldn't be right, right? Because this information should be read before this information. So you can see how I'm playing with the energy of type size, fonts, but watch what happens if I do this. Do I still read this second? Nope, I read this second. The reason I read this second now, even though it's rotated on a 90-degree axis, is because this is so small, it's really hard to read, right? So now I'm forcing the viewer to read this, then this, then this, even though these two share the same baseline. They share that same negative space. You can see it right here. It reads like two paragraphs, even though the scale is different. But when you make it uber small, you're forced to read this before this. So those are things to think about when you're doing your event poster, that the sky is the limit, what you want to create. But watch what happens if I do this. I mean, I could do this all day long. A, I love typography. B, I love problem solving. Like, I love the concept of figuring out how to control what people are processing, like based on what I'm feeding them. I should have been a sociology major because I really do enjoy the psychology of how people interact with information, how I can get people to buy a $3 bottle of water when you can just go to the water fountain and drink it for free, right? So look at this, designing with type. Does your brain fill the I in? It does. What if I stretch this and touch it to that one? Right? It's so interesting to me how you can control how people perceive things based on what you do. What if I did that? What if I did this? Where you just get a peek of the letter versus this, where you don't see the letter. I mean, it's very interesting to me how you control the consumer based on how you use color and shape and space. And there are so many different ways to do really interesting things with only color, letters, and shapes. So hopefully this little bit of 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes of exploration will help you creative problem solve what you're going to do with your event poster. And you'll see the difference if I shrink this way down and I stick it in the corner, what that does versus taking it, making it real big, right? Scale just controls so many things. If I center align it, I mean, there's so many ways. There is a effective way to communicate and an ineffective way. So make sure legibility and readability is a priority when you're laying your thing out. I should read the class first, the location time second, and the designer and the professor third. There's lots of ways to lay this thing out, but my name should not be the most important thing in your poster. If I read Professor McElroy first, we got a problem, because although I'm a rock star, I'm not the most important part of the event, right? The actual class itself, which sells itself once you learn about it. So keep that in mind as you lay your mini project out. And then you're going to save for me a PDF, right? You can use any program you want that you feel comfortable with. I use that as the baseline. Some students use their apps on their phone. Some use Word, some use PowerPoint. Hell, you could use a stencil if you wanted to from Staples or Office Max, a series of letters, stickers, as long as you have different sizes or some way to control how you're laying it out. But I did just show you that you could use all the same size letter and still create a visually interesting solution. Yes, I could make really big letters for DWT and make them like watermarks in the background and make this thing super busy and lots of shapes and stuff going on. Or I could make it as simple as this. You're being judged on your communication ability. Can I read it? Can I process it? Can I understand it? And do you tell me the information in the appropriate order? Foreground, middle ground, background, title, location, time, lecturer, designer. So the designer's not most important unless you're Vera Wang. And I don't think any of you are Vera Wang. So we shouldn't be reading your name first. Your name should be on there, but it should be more like a copyright, not the title to a marquee, right? We're not seeing Ant-Man or whatever. My kids are so excited to see Ant-Man, right? Ant-Man and Wasp or whatever the name of it was. How they made a superhero out of a tiny ant is beyond me. Like, how's that even a superhero, right? But although Marvel or whoever is the owner of the Ant-Man, they are kind of important. But in the scheme of things, marquee-wise, Ant-Man and Wasp is the most important. Marvel or whoever owns the character is secondary, right? So just keep that in mind. If you need to translate what I'm asking you translate it to a product advertisement or a movie poster. Like, what's the most important thing in something you saw? And you may find something on the internet that inspires you. There's nothing wrong with using inspiration, taking the information I'm asking you to do and try to replicate it using the inspiration, right? They did it this way. Let me see if I can reformat the elements I need to format and make it look like the thing I'm inspired by, right? Deconstruct to reconstruct. So let's see how you do with it. Legibility and readability is really important. And remember, no images. And I say that over and over again, and somebody's going to put a typewriter on their poster, or they're going to put a computer monitor, or God knows what. They're going to use an image. Do not use an image. Shape and color and type only. Okay. And that's how we'll do the project. And remember, you can use portrait or landscape. Now, I'm going to go ahead and delete that because we're going to move on to mini project number 2. So we can start talking about logo design, what makes it an important element of branding, right? You have to have a logo, a brand to promote. Actors and actresses and athletes, they all sell their own personal brand. The ones that are really good at it, Michael Jordan, Tiger Woods, Steph Curry, Brad Pitt, like all of these people, Tom Hanks, Tom Cruise, right? All these people, they're really good at selling themselves as a logo, as a brand. Some of them even have their own logo as a brand. Some, it's their signature is their brand, right? So they're trying to take the characteristics of their personality and make it a brand. Well, logo design is no different. You're trying to capture the essence of the product or service inside of some visual mark or visual brand. So think about all the popular ones: Target, Best Buy with the little tag, PetSmart with the little animals with the type. I mean, you could think about all the places that you go to frequently that you can tell from a mile away as you're driving up the essence of what the thing is based on what that brand is, that typography is. Some of it's script, some of it's block. It just depends on what that product or service is and the type of market they're trying to promote, but it is kind of what they do in order to sell their product or service. So with that being said, Little Red Riding Hood is our mini project number 2. Now, I took the time to capture a few different ones that are out there when you do a Google search for a product or a service, so that you could see the styles of inspiration. So look at the typography, the different types of typography, right? A brand is how to write something, symbol, letters, shapes, to communicate a product or service, to capture the essence of that product or service. So the same for actors and actresses and athletes. They're trying to capture who they are by building a personal brand. It's no different than Perrier water with a fancy shaped bottle and the green label and the tinted glass in order to get you buy that water over buying Dasani or Aquafina or whatever, right? So typography, color, shape, it all controls or determines the look and feel of something, the type of audience. I would say this is like a cardboard book for a 1, 2, 3-year-old telling the story of Little Red Riding Hood. This is getting more teenager-ish in feeling, still kind of fun and playful, right? The negative space of the I dots, they're all the same size. The staggering of the letters, it's all the same size, but it's more whimsical versus this, where you're talking about a copper plate Gothic. You're talking about a more aggressive style of typography to capture the mood of, look at the offset where the writing is offset to the right and the hood is offset to the left, and it's all stacked in kind of this, stacked aggressive, lots of kind of curvature to the lettering, totally different than this playfulness, more adult in this format. And then last but not least, really modern in feeling, kind of a serif cut out shape of the letter form to create the riding hood image, right? These are all different styles of how to address logo design using the written word based on the audience age, the demographic, the color, right? Red's a lot more aggressive than black. So if you're going more childlike, more rounded, more kerning, more negative space, more subtleties, right? Very clean, little more playful, a little bit more on an angle, positive and negative space, still lots of curves, still lots of legibility, aggressive, right? Very ornate, very stacked, very thick and thin, very strong serifs, right? So these are all aspects of logo design when we take letters, numbers, and symbols away from just shape. We get into legibility and readability, but we're still thinking about or still putting the importance on what positive and negative spaces are generated based on, what you're writing, upper and lower case versus all uppercase versus kind of a cap height, which is what this is. So now we're really starting to explore positive and negative space, letters, writing something, stacking it, playing with it, making it interesting, but also targeting an audience. And yes, color is a strong determining factor. The minute you make something red and black, it makes it far more angry, aggressive. Even though this is super modern, I would not say this is necessarily aggressive. It's way different than just like a dark blue, simple style of writing. So, and that brings us into our mini project number 2, right? So number 1 was that event poster. Number 2 is our little red riding hood. I did this little image because I think it's awesome. This is a great little 3D claymation version of Little Red Riding Hood. You can see the little fangs sticking out here. This is not the pop-up book, first grade, second grade, third grade kind of thing. So we're, yeah, Tim Burton. Yeah, right. So we're still doing Little Red Riding Hood, right? Maybe a modern interpretation of the story. So that means clean lines, rounded, right? Think of everything that's more modern in nature. But I have to say, that doesn't necessarily mean that a script or like a Gothic typeface can't feel modern. With leading and kerning and spacing, it could still feel modern. So we're going to try to make an interpretation here. See how you interpret Little Red Riding Hood. These are the words you need in order to kind of create the essence of 3D, foreground, middle ground, and background, right? Layered in a 2-dimensional space. It's got to be vector. You have to create it in Illustrator. But beyond that, let's start exploring typography now in logo design, right? So like Toys R Us, if you invert the R, it immediately creates kind of an interesting kind of dilemma. When I create logos, I do everything in black and white first, and I introduce color later. Because if you use color as the primary determining factor in your solution, it means when it goes black and white, it may not be successful, right? Everything should work in a scanned copy, printed out on a black and white piece of paper, and still be effective. So I tell students all the time, if you print your ad out, your beautiful color ad or your packaging design or whatever you're doing, print it on the cheapest printer we have at the school. If you can still see background, middle ground, and foreground, and you could still read the elements in the appropriate order, then you did a good job with color, shape, and texture. If you print that thing out and it looks really dark and everything looks exactly the same, you did not do a good job of color separating things into background, middle ground, and foreground. You didn't create any visual separation, any visual hierarchy. All you did was fall in love with color or shape, right? So that is something that we're thinking about. Now, the beauty about logo design is we're barely using any words here. Little Red Riding Hood, 4 simple little words. But there's a lot that can be done with 4 simple little words. So let's go over and now let's take a look at mini project number 2, right? So I'm going to do exactly what I did with the last project. I'm going to type in Little Red Riding Hood. I'm going to put it in my pasteboard. Like this is always my pasteboard, right? I always move it over here. I'm actually going to put them on separate lines just so it makes it easier in my pasteboard, knowing that I'm only using that as a template, right? I'm only using that as like, that's the information I need to have in my design. So I always start my pasteboard. Sometimes I'll do little squares over here and I'll fill them with color, different colors. So I know what my color palette is when I'm doing my design. So let's say my client says, I really love like shades of red, right? So I'll go over here actually, and I'll just create one of these. And I'll do like a 4-color process. So I'll just make 4 little squares over here. And then I'll go into my color palette and I'll take the first one and I'll go to color. And let's first look at my swatches, like maybe this red is the beginning of something. So I'm like, oh, I really like that pure red. And then I'll go over here and I'll fill my next red. And maybe I'll go into my color palette and I'll say, I want this one to be a little bit darker. So I'm going to tint that one down. I'm going to go in here with my eyedropper. I'm going to grab the original color. And this one, I'm going to add a little bit more, kind of like a little bit more yellow to it. And then I'm going to go back to my original color. I'm going to use my eyedropper. And this one, I'm going to add a little bit more magenta to, right? So maybe this is, my client loves red, deep reds. And I'm like, I'm going to start with this color palette. And this is my pasteboard. And I may end up varying from this. It just gives me something to think about, right? And the next thing I'll do is like, be like, okay, what's the most important word here? Is little important? Is red important? Is writing important? Or is hood important? Like, what are the most important words? Well, I would say little is probably the least important. Red, writing, hood, I'm going to guess really are my primary words that I need to emphasize. And out of red, writing, hood, I think writing hood, it probably is the most important words, red being kind of second, and then maybe little being third. Now, with that being said, that's how I'm thinking about communicating my brand, my logo to whatever my consumer is. But there's lots of little red riding hoods that little is the biggest word. And it's script and everything under it is a little bit small. So you read little, but little is really big and everything else is kind of a little bit smaller. By changing, varying, making something that not necessarily is the biggest, you also control like what's going on, like what am I thinking about? What am I trying to get the consumer to control? So I'm going to do different things with my concepts so you can see the difference in the concepts. So I'm going to take the word little and I'm going to do a bunch of little thumbnails. And this is a really important part of the process if you're doing the process kind of starting from step 1 and then kind of going through. So the first thing is I'm going to do little. Now, if you type the word and you select it, then your character palette will show you what it looks like without having to pick it. And so I can scroll down here immediately because all of these are block and I don't know if that's necessarily what I want. So I'm just going to keep going until I find something that catches my eye because I have a thought about something, how I want to do it. So unfortunately, this teacher station also is the station that every instructor uses. And so you'll notice that I have so many typefaces on this computer. It's like ridiculous. So let's see what we got here. I'm trying to see if anything jumps out to me as being something that I want to use as my font. I was looking for something a little more decorative. I'm going to do this, but I'm actually going to do this. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to make my font. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller because I've got to lay out a few things for you. So I'm just talking you through my process so you can see how I go through what I do. So lowercase, even if it's really big and it's script, can be subtle, can be not the most important thing. So I wanted riding hood in my solution to be the most important. So I'm going to use that as one text block, because that way I can control what my leading and kerning is. So if I make it all one, so now let's go over to my font and I want something far more aggressive in my type selection for riding hood, because I want that to be the most important thing that people see. So I'm going to look for something that has some like really cool kind of aggressive weight to it. So just for the sake of the process, I'm going to be extreme with what I choose, just so that you can see the difference visually in what I'm doing. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to give it negatives kerning. I'm going to move this thing so that this, I'm going to outline that so it's a shape. So I'm going to use that as my, so let's do this. And I'm just showing you, and I'm just being aggressively different with what I'm doing. So you get the idea of controlling the consumer using scale, proportion, kerning, leading. So that's Little Riding Hood right now, right? The closer I bring this, the more the relationship becomes. Watch what happens if I overlap it. So now you can start to see, I can't even read little because it's bleeding into Riding Hood. And these things look like waves in essence. They kind of look like waves. So I can't do that. So I got to do a play with my kerning, my leading, so that there's some space. Now I can read little. I at least get it now. So we have Little Riding Hood, but remember red has to be in there somewhere, right? Because red is the word that should be between little and Riding Hood. So I'm just playing with spatially how I have my elements, just so you can see how I read. So red now is important. And so let's make it bigger. I'm going to rotate it so it shares the same axis. Now I have to problem solve, right? So I have little, I have red. So you can see Red Riding Hood. So watch what happens if I move it over here. And I'm just talking you through the grid, right? Because when you lay out things, you're trying to lay things out in some kind of spatial grid. So look, Red Little Riding Hood, right? That doesn't make sense because we read left to right, top to bottom. It doesn't matter that this is the thickest, and it even doesn't matter if I make this super big, right? I still need us to read this thing where it makes sense. And that's where students struggle at times because they're not taking into account the legibility of the reading of this thing. So now it's Little Red Riding Hood. Now watch what happens if I do this. And I'm going to just play with shades of color so that we can start thinking about color now too. So look now, red reads first, little reads second, and Riding Hood reads third because it's a light gray and this is a dark black. So let's invert that. Let's make this black, make this light gray. So now I'm talking about kind of visual shape, the size and scale of things, and now control of color and how that dictates kind of what you're doing. Now look at the difference here. Watch if I do this. And so I'm not even changing typography now. I'm just talking you through the process of taking shapes just like we were before and creating things that read differently. And they all can be effective in their own little way. You just got to know. Yep, here's Little Red Riding Hood. Well, look at the difference versus this, right? Versus this, versus this, versus this. And look at the negative space here. So it's exploration of negative space, positive space, color, shape, alignment, scale, proportion, energy. Look at this. Versus this, versus this. I mean, everything plays into how you read something, the order at which you read it, all which can be controlled by color, shape, kerning, leading, alignment, scale, proportion. So I spend a lot of time And typically I do this on pen and paper. I'm doing thumbnails through my brain process on the computer because I'm sharing the computer and I'm recording it. And I want you to see the process that I go through to problem solve, what words are important, the scale and proportion and location of those elements, and how I use leading and kerning and alignment to make sure that everything reads the way I want in the appropriate order that I want. And so you can see now how I explore that space. And every student's going to do this. I already know it before I even start the project. Everyone's going to laugh while I do this. So let's do that. And every single time I do this project, everyone's like, I got this great idea. Yeah. Well, let's move this out of the way just so you can see what I'm doing. Move my other elements out of the way. Isn't this a great idea? I used one R to write read and writing. I made hood big enough to make this a big rectangle in shape. And I rotated little on its side and ran it up the stem of the R in order to make my thing. And you can Google this. And there'll be a ton of people that did this exact thing. One script R to write read and writing, or wrote two script R's, but overlapped them to make them look like one script R to write read and writing. And then they just fit little and hood around it. And they made the R the monogram, the RR, the monogram of the logo. And you can effectively do that with the understanding of fonts and typography and that sort of thing. But let's see how you do writing little red riding hood in a logo environment and have it be read correctly using the type that you select and the scale and proportion you select. And yes, you can do things like, I don't know, let's do this a little bit. You know, oh, it's 3D, right? A little skew, a little perspective, you know, to create kind of a shape. Let's do, you know, yeah, we're in essence creating a folded piece of paper by using a little bit of the shear or perspective tool to create kind of this goes on an angle kind of thing. So you can rotate things, you can kind of lean them a little bit. You can use some shapes if you want, a little stripe, a little triangle, a little star. You could, one student, I think last semester, took the R and made Riding Hood's face out of it. Like they removed this and they made like a little face in here, did a little eyeball in here. You could see what's happening here. I don't even have to create that much of it. So shapes are your friend. So let's see how creative, right? And you could do a little piece of hair or something here using a, you know, a little bracket shape or something of typography. So, and you'll notice I used these things as inspiration because someone did use typography in order to create, in essence, Little Red's face. I mean, this is just a little cutout, a little webbing of the typeface. This is actually the serif. It looks like the inverted serif from the typeface, and they made a little line to make an eyeball. So it's certainly things that have been done. Like if you did this, and I always like to create outlines with my type so that I'm just going to make it white. You know, it immediately starts becoming the eyeball. Gosh, this starts to look like the mean. Looks like Monsters Inc. or something, like that's the pupil and the eyeball, and it's like got an angle on it, right? But this is a fun typography. You have 4 simple words, and you're trying to communicate the essence of Little Red Riding Hood using typography, color, and shape only, and visually kind of stack the words and see what you come up with. I want to see what you think is successful by just exploring the shapes. Like, what to you is a successful solution? I think I communicated Little Red Riding Hood really well with X or Y or Z. Gosh, I love negative space. Like, I could literally sit here and play all day long with letters, numbers, and symbols to kind of problem solve. Look at this little tiny thing that's created there. And it's like, what is that? Like, what can that be? Versus if I move it over here. It's so interesting to me. Like, I could literally be a designer that was like, I can create every client's solution just with letters, numbers, and symbols. And let's see how I do with it. Okay. All right. So that's mini project number 2. So we covered mini project number 1, mini project number 2. We're doing good. Hour, 15 minutes. We're still there. All right. So the last one we're going to spend 20 or 30 minutes on, and we're going to talk a little bit about Fontstruct.com. So I'm going to go ahead and close out of my Illustrator, because you guys can use any program you want for those 2 mini projects. But you should be seeing now through our learning modules, history and anatomy of type. 2, type as a shape, learning module 2. Learning module 3, type as a written word. Kerning, leading, spacing, hierarchy, color, shape are all important to communicate an effective message. So we went from making things out of letters and numbers and symbols to now creating the essence of what we want, the personality of what we want, the energy of what we want, but we have to write it in a way that people can read it and understand it. So that brings us to probably the favorite project of what most people think of with designing with type class. And they're like, I want to make my own typeface. Well, be careful what you ask for, because creating your own typeface is hard, and it's time consuming, and it's tricky. And when you're done, you're going to hate half the letters you made. I mean, it's the nature of the beast, because type is an alphabet of common communication. Think about cave drawings and hieroglyphics and all of these cultures that evolved over time and use some kind of pictogram or pictograph or some illustration, or in some cases, a written language in order to communicate, I killed this hunting, or I caught this fishing, or you start a fire by doing this, or you build a house this way, right? Written language is really important for historical purposes and also for communicating amongst yourselves or with other people what you're trying to say or do. And so Fontstruct.com is a really cool free cloud tool to create your own typeface. So if you've never used it before, you can go to Fontstruct.com, set up a username and password. I tell everyone just to use their Hodges email address and whatever password they can remember or whatever. And when you get in, when you log in, you get into this. Now, these are all fonts people created with Fontstruct. And you're going to look in the recent staff picks and some of the things that were created, and you're going to be like, oh my God, how did they do that using this tool, right? Because people actually sell their typefaces that they created here. Because when you create them, you can download them and put them in your font folder, and it thinks it's Arial or Helvetica. It will literally take your font, put it in your font folder, and you can go to Word, PowerPoint, Photoshop, Illustrator, any program, and you go to the character palette and the name of your font will be there. And you will be able to type out anything that you want to write in your typeface. So you're like, that's pretty interesting. If I ever wanted to make my own magazine, I could make my own alphabet, and then I could type the name of my alphabet. Maybe I want to make my own logo, but I want to use my handwriting, or I want to have my own typeface to write out my logo. Well, guess what? Fontstruct will allow you to create an alphabet, download the TTF, and put that true typeface in your font folder, wherever your text folder is on your computer. They call it the font folder in the Mac. That's why I'm calling it that. And it will literally, if you close out of any program you're in and reopen it up, you can type, and whatever alphabet letter you don't get to, it will skip it. So if you only do all uppercase, everything you type in will be in all uppercase. If you skip a particular letter, there will be a space in your word. Like, I don't like J's. Well, guess what? If you type out a word that has a J in it, but you didn't create a J, it will just give it a space and it will keep going on, which begs the argument, man, that's a really interesting way. If you wanted to code something that only you and someone you told about your font, what letters you skipped. So if they saw a space and they're like, God, he skipped all the R's, you know, they'd be able to still read the message because they knew you skipped all the R's. So everywhere that there's a space in their brain, they would put an R there, right? So Fontstruct is very interesting as it goes, as it pertains to like learning font construction. Yes, the masters of it, right? Tobias, the guy I showed that made the Freedom font with his buddy, and they've since separated. He's a typographer and he uses software to build complex typography. This is a simple brick structure in order to create type, but it's still fun. It's fun to figure out how type is constructed. And so Fontstruct is really awesome. So log on to fontstruct.com, set up a very simple username and password, and you'll notice when you log in, I've actually created a few so you can see the ones that I was making with other classes. I delete them every once in a while, so I think these are the last two I did. So you'll see this little bubble thing versus this more harsh looking thing that I created. But gosh, man, you should see some of the ones in the font library that people have created, but they call them font structions. So when you're creating a font on Fontstruct, you're creating a new font struction. And now when you create one, it will appear on your home page and you can go into it and edit it. You can play around with it. You can add to it. So, and this is cloud-based, right? So as long as you can get to fontstruct.com, you could, on your lunch break at work, make the Z or whatever. You're using everything that's absolutely cloud software based, and you need no Adobe. You don't need any special apps or anything, and it saves it here and you can download it here. Everything is contained in a web browser. So that's a really cool thing. So every once in a while I'll be tinkering around with things. I like the ability to open it up on my iPad or my phone or whatever when I'm just hanging out. Sometimes I wait for my kids somewhere and it's like I can use my phone to open up Canvas and check my classes, or sometimes I'll be drawing something in an app or something like that. So Fontstruct's really great for that. So I need to name my font. So that's how I'm starting my Fontstruct. So my 14-year-old's name is Sullivan. And so that's why you see Sullyman and Sullivan, or Sullivan for the font. My 16-year-old is Jacob with a K. So this one, I'll just name it Jacob so that it's different than Sully, because that's how I did my previous font that I was creating for the class before this. We teach typography 2 or 3 times a year. A, I love it and a bunch of people sign up for it. And B, you don't need software. Like, you can literally use any program that you have. We're learning about typography and I'm teaching it in a way that you can use whatever you have. So lots of students like that because they don't have to particularly know Illustrator, or they don't have to be comfortable in Photoshop. Gosh, if you are comfortable in Word or PowerPoint or anything that has a text tool, you can do the projects. And it's no different for here. As long as you have a browser and you can use the internet, you can create a typeface. So I'm going to go ahead and start my Jacob font. And you're going to see this little window pops up now. So let's take a look at this thing, because it has a very simple toolbar. This thing right here. All right. And it has a very simple, I'm going to zoom out a little bit just so that you can see. It has a very simple structure. So this is called coordinate 0, 0. This little spot right here is the edge of your wooden block that your letter is carved out on, right? It's the beginning of your little wooden block. And you'll notice there is a series of vertical squares and horizontal squares. And you have this little coordinate right here, which is 0, 0 with a dot. And we already know baseline is the line that the font sits on, that then dictates X height, cap height, descender, ascender, right? We know all of these things already because we learned a little bit about type anatomy. And you're going to notice right down here, it has all the uppercase and all the lowercase letters. And it's telling you, now, let's create a letter in this grid environment, starting at 0, 0 for an uppercase A. Now, the way Fontstruct works is it uses what's called bricks. So you're going to see all of these little shapes here. Imagine this shape fills into that square. So these bricks are what create the shapes or the strokes for our letters that we're trying to create. So now you should immediately be like, my letters are going to have, the uppercase A is going to have a rounded bottom area, a rounded top, and some kind of crossbar, right? That's what I'm thinking in my brain right now. How am I going to create this thing? Rounded bottom, round top. And I want it to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 squares tall. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 squares wide. Now, I'm saying 8 tall, 6 wide, which means that every one of my uppercase letters needs to be 8 squares tall, 6 squares wide. Because remember, when you type it out, the kerning is based on the size of the block and how it fits in the text tool, right? How you type it out. And the baseline, the cap height, everything is determined by that. So I need 8 wide, 6 across. So in my brain, I'm thinking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if I do 2 for the bottom right part of the upper A and 2 for the bottom left of the upper A, then I have 2 in between it. So that's probably pretty good. So let me see what I have here that I can create my bottom part. I'm going to take this and I'm going to tap it right there. I'm going to take this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm going to tap this one over there. Then I'm going to take this, tap it there, this. So you can immediately see what I'm doing, right? I'm creating the bottom 2 column thickness to my uppercase A. So I've already determined these are the shapes for kind of my sans serif area of my A. So let's go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So this is the top of my A right here. So I need this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I need that to be that. I need this to be this. Okay, so now I got to figure out how to connect that to that and this to this. So let's, and it stores my bricks, right? So it knows the history of what I've done for my letter so that I don't have to reinvent the wheel. All right, so now to make life easy in the process of what I'm trying to create here, I think I'm going to use simple squares for the rest of my A. So I'm going to do this brick. So let's see here. How do I want to connect this thing? All right, so I got the beginning of my A, and you can see all of the brick patterns. So now watch what happens as I start to get kind of tricky with my extra shapes. So let me just see what I can find here that might be interesting. If I did that, and I did that. Oh, wrong one. I want to do, let's see, let's do this. Drop that one in there. I want to remove that one. Maybe I'll do that one there. And let's see what we have here. Maybe, and I'm just playing around so you can see what I'm trying to create here. Where's the diagonal? Where's that one with that? Maybe this one, that. And so you can see what I'm doing. So let's say, all right, so that's the beginning of my A. So we have 8 tall and 6 across. So then I'm going to go to B. Now B, I'm looking at the rounded to see what I have to do here from a rounded standpoint. So I have all these bricks I have to replicate now. So like this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that has to be there. This one has to be here, which then argues 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That has to be there. This has to be there. Let me go back to my A. So I have rounded corners, I have solid strokes, and I have these weird pyramid things in the middle. And so I need my brick. Let's see, where's my standard old, this thing? All right, so my A is rounded, but then it's got weird diamonds and pyramids through the middle. It does look like the crossbar goes through the middle. So maybe this goes like this for my B. And then I need my A has these weird triangular things. So let me see if I can find the weird triangular things. Maybe that there. That there. There. So I'm just playing around so I could start to use my same bricks that I used. Now I did use some weird hokey ones. So I don't know, maybe in the corners here to get my A to go to my B. And then I got to go to my C. And now you can really see what I got going on here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the C, I need this. I need this. 6. Then I need my top. So I need that. I need this. And I need the bricks in the middle. I need the brick here. Now I'm going to make something that looks a little bit more normal with this one, just so that you can see I'm going crazy, just to show you that you can go crazy depending on what you're doing. Right, that's obviously the most legible of the beginning of my letters. So there's C, and then I go on to D, and I go all the way through my alphabet. And right here is my download button. And you'll notice it says download as a true type font. Now, when I click on that little thing, it downloads the zip file, and watch what happens. I'm going to double click on the zip file, and here's my little folder, and there is jacob.ttf. This thing is no different than any typeface inside of my font. And I actually just hit the space bar for the preview, and it shows the 3 letters that I created. So if I had my whole alphabet there, I would see my entire alphabet, and it's called Jacob, and it would be in my character palette. if I downloaded it, so let's just go here. So right here, under the J's would be Jacob. If I had downloaded that TTF and I had finished my alphabet and I put it into my font folder. So this thing is a legitimate type tool for creating a font. I used my diagonal line thing here. You'll see that you can literally pick a brick shape and create a handwritten letter. I mean, literally, I could take this and let's say it was like, Chip, you're crazy. Like, this is ridiculous. I mean, it can be as free-formed as selecting bricks, a series of bricks. Wow, that's really interesting, actually. I don't know why I did that, but the angle on that B crossbar is like really funky. Happy little accident, I guess. But remember, it's got to be consistent with how you do width and height, because remember, this thing is, so I'm just going to go over to E just because I haven't created it yet. Like if I did this, right, this is way wider. That one's really wide, right, than this. And just remember that this is a block. So when you type it in your text tool, it's got to be able to fit kerning wise into a correct height and width. So if 8 tall and 6 wide is my caps, maybe my lowercase is like, 5 by 4 or something. But maybe the lowercase is just a cap height, a cap letter down to like cap height. So what if that was small a, and this, let me delete this real quick. Maybe this is, tall a. So look at the difference, right? I mean, you get the idea. It's a very interesting exploration. This actually needs to be like that. Get rid of that. I know. I mean, I could tinker with this thing all day, but right. So there's the top, upper, and there's the lowercase. So this one is 1, 2, 3, 4 by 4. And this one is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9 by 6. So 4 by 4, 9 by 6. So now I know this one has to be 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 4. How am I going to do a B here? Well, maybe that's my B on this one because I have such a small little block here that it looks ridiculous. So now, all right, so this would go back to here. And what did I say? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. What was the width? 6. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
When you download it, you'd be able to change the font size for each letter.
You could, but you want to not fall in love with that because you would be editing every word of every sentence because. So what did I do with A, the lowercase b? I made a weird little period there because there was no way to do it. So how could I do that here? Maybe like that. And so lowercase is that weird little indent, and the uppercase is the bigger indent. Kind of abstract, but interesting nonetheless, right? So you can see now like this thing and how it constructs itself based on the brick. I would play around with these bricks and drawing because look at all the, I mean, it's crazy, all the separate shapes here. I mean, you can create some very interesting things, and there's nothing more interesting than when you download it and you use Word or something and you type out the title using your typeface. Like I make my typeface and I type out the name of the typeface in my typeface, and then you really get kind of this, wow, I made this thing and it's really interesting for good or bad, right? Because it's practice that creates. But look at, so I'm just going to skip out of there for a second. I mean, this guy or girl deserves an award. Like, look at this, the way they made that double thickness in order to make all the uppercase letters. Like, look how beautiful that is. It was made here. I mean, that's an angle brick. That's an angle brick, straight bricks, angle brick, angle brick. I mean, man, I mean, some people just, I mean, really creative people. I mean, look at all the different ones. They're getting all rated too. This is more like what mine ends up looking when I do kind of a long exploration of this tool. I end up getting these weird bows and buckles and everything on my letters because that's, you know, what I end up doing with my bricks.
Is there
But
a way to restrict the grid? Like if you're going by like, if you were saying 8 high and 6 across or something, can I preset the grid to stay at those dimensions?
so no, it's like an open grid book as far as the grid goes. But yeah, I understand what you're saying. Let me find my thing here. So yeah, I know what you're saying. So like you could do this, which certainly does help a little bit because it at least gives you, sometimes I'll do this.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that.
so that
yeah, so I know
I stay in structure because it's really easy to erase that thing after, right?
I was actually just thinking about, well, I guess I'll just make an outline on it.
You know,
but I get it though.
Yeah, so I mean, you can add, you know, some guides to it so that it helps you kind of contain your thing, right?
Yeah, see, that would be, okay, that's basically what I was asking, yeah, something like that. That would help.
So that will help you with your thing a little bit.
So now I know, okay,
you know, like that sort of thing. I typically just draw a box around it, to be honest with you. But yeah, they do have that. You can, you know, flip some things, flip it around a little bit. I will do this too sometimes. Like, let's say I create my B. So let's just have a success story here. Like highlight this and copy it. And then let's say just go in and, so I'll just go in here and I'll paste it. And so I'll have the beginning of the thing that I need, right? And then I can, you know, so I could break it down and use the pieces I need to use again to replicate the lowercase based on the uppercase. That's what I traditionally do. If I build like ABCD all uppercase, I'll bring it in and then I can move my pieces around and try to reproduce it based on the smaller scale. It's interesting because I've built probably 15 typefaces in here. And I would say out of the 15 typefaces, there were probably more than that, 20 over the 15 years I've been teaching this. I would say maybe 3. I'm like, oh man, I might use this again. And my other 12, it's like, what was I thinking? Like it worked fine for the word I was trying to write, but it didn't work for anything else. But I have built for particular projects, like if I'm making a program or a brochure or something, and I want to create something interesting for the headline, the title, the call to action, I will create only the letters of the alphabet in here for what I need, and then use it for like the program cover. So if it said like monsters, I might come in here and create some funky typeface just with the uppercase monster letters, and then save it as monster.ttf bring it in my folder. And then I remember when I go to my font thing, like, oh my gosh, I still have monster.ttf, which I used to make the monster headline for the magazine or the event I was doing. So it is fun. It's an interesting tool, but more importantly, it's just a reinforcer of why type is what it is, why it's important, the anatomy of it, what you can do with it, like the personality of it based on the designer, like all the things that come kind of full circle. So your third mini project is to create a typeface in Fontstruct, and you will give me the TTF as your final submission, because I'm going to download it to my Illustrator and I'm going to type in it so I can see what it looks like.
My other question would be, if I zoom out further off the grid, I could make smoother lines, correct?
Yes, because you're making taller ones.
Yeah.
So in essence, yes,
Yeah.
because you're using more bricks to draw your line. So if you use 20 by 20, you can certainly make a better shape. Just know that the TTF is determining your cap height is 20 by 20. And so that how it determines how it's going to type. Exactly. But they aren't, because when you make them 10 point, it shrinks it down. So yes,
As long as you create the whole alphabet.
as long as you create it consistently, then the software knows how to type it out. And some students will create their uppercase and lowercase, and all the lowercase is a shrink down version of the uppercase. So then when you type with it, it looks like cap heights where everything's tall and then it just shrinks down a little bit to make the lowercase. And that's kind of interesting too. So it's a fun exploration. It can eat hours. I mean, you could see it here, like while I'm problem solving, it's like, oh my gosh. So I build maybe like A, B, and C first and make sure I have the curves and the uppercase the way I want it. And then I'll do the lowercase version of A, B, and whatever the font is, whatever the letter is, they're going to kind of be using as your foundation. Sometimes students use a K or the Q because they really see what they want to do with that. And that aligns the bricks and the my bricks, and then they build everything based on it. But I try to do 3 letters, upper and lowercase first, and then kind of build everything after I'm happy with those, because those will determine the bricks I used, the X and Y coordinate, width and height I use for upper and lowercase, and they'll set the foundation for everything else. And then you just churn everything else out after that. So, but you'll give me the TTF. All right, gang. So let me just pop up the course real quick, just so that we're all kind of where we're at here. I'm going to try to share some things as the week goes on, or the weekend. We're at a 2 hour and 45 minute, hour and 50-minute lecture. So I do want to end the recording, which will give you time to start playing with your projects, give you some open lab time. If you're watching this as a recording, then you can watch it as a recording later, and it's not a huge thing. I look forward to your project. Really good job so far. And so we're going to keep plugging along and kind of see how we're doing. So great job so far, class. Have a good week.